Today is truly a historical day in the journey of the School of Inspired Leadership because we feel very blessed that today we have the good fortune to host Shri Rajmohan Gandhi ji, who is one of the most illustrious sons of India. And I was looking forward to welcoming him, and I wrote to him and I kept thinking about it, and finally we did get the response from Rajmohan ji. And today is also another special day because from today onwards, we are going to invite in each one of these webinars one of our alumni who is going to share the space with me, because the first 30 minutes I will be asking Rajmohan ji questions. And after that, Mayank will be on behalf of the audience and therefore on behalf of the young people, many of them who are in this program, will be reading out the questions and asking Rajmohan ji those questions. And in the last couple of minutes, just before we end, we will of course try to understand the essence of what has happened today. So Rajmohan ji, thank you very much for coming into our program today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving me the chance to be with all of you. Thank you, Anil ji.
So Rajmohan ji, the first question I always ask is, in this journey of life that you have been blessed with, and you've had such an amazing journey, and you've done all kinds of very, very unique things in your life. So out of all, when you look back at different parts of your journey, what are some of the moments which stand out in your memory as very, very special moments that gave you lots of happiness and joy?
That moments that may seem very important to me may or may not be really that important to in the final analysis. Who knows? We are all very poor judges of our own lives. If you're talking about happiness and joy, then it's relatively easy to answer. When I married my wife, Usha, when our children came, first our daughter and then our son, and then many years later, when our first grandchild, and still our only, those were absolutely wonderfully happy occasions. Of course, another amazingly happy occasion in India was when the emergency ended in 1977. So that was also something that gave me very great joy. So, but I would also say that moments of satisfaction and happiness, of course, one treasures them, one cherishes them, one also wants everyone else to have satisfying and happy moments. Yeah, anyway, I'll stop with that.
So, inevitably, you are always asked a question, and therefore, I'm sure our students would also like to understand from you. Early part of your childhood, when you are the grandson of the great Mahatma, what are your memories of what you recount of your personal interaction with him, and how did you experience him as a little child?
So I have some memories, and I have a handful of photographs also that indicate the kind of relationship I had with him. My grandmother Kasturba was present when I was born, so she was, of course, my grandfather was not. And I have memories of visiting my grandparents, Gandhiji and Kasturba, when they were in detention in Pune in the Aga Khan Palace, as it was called, but it was a jail. And we were allowed to see them because my grandmother was dying, so the family were allowed by the British to see them. And then In the last phase of his life, Gandhiji was frequently in Delhi between 46 and 48. When he was going from 76 to 78, and I was going from 10 to 12, I saw a good deal of him on his visits to Delhi, because that is where I was growing up. My father was Gandhiji's youngest son. He was the editor of the Hindustan Times. And we had this apartment in Connaught Circus where we all lived. But I was frequently with Gandhiji during his visits to Delhi. He sometimes stayed in the Valmiki colony on Mandir Marg, along with the other Dalits. They were called Harijans in those days. We call them Dalits now. They themselves call themselves Dalits. But yes, Gandhiji lived with them, and I was frequently with him there. Then in the final few months of his life, when he was in Birla House, and these January marks, so I also visited him there. So he was always very affectionate. And he would either hug or he would give a good thump on the back to show his affection. And as I've often said, that even though he was old and often fasting, his thump had some strength, which I remember. But to me, the most memorable part of those interactions when he was in his mid to late 70s and I was 10, 11, 12, was to see how he coped with those who were unhappy with him, angry with him, or even hostile to him. Because there were people like that. There were Hindus and Sikhs who had come from Pakistan and who felt that Gandhiji could have stopped partition, and he didn't. They were unhappy with him. There were many Muslims of the Delhi area who were being pushed out of Delhi. So they were also coming to see him. And so he was, and I was frequently with him, near him, when these groups of people would interact with him. And sometimes, of course, most people who saw him were very warm and respectful towards him, but there were these unhappy, angry elements. And to me, two things stand out. One was his complete cordiality and friendship with people, even if they were angry with him. So he was always reasoning with them, mostly listening to them. His face showed that he was full of warmth towards them, but he also never gave up on his convictions. So his willingness to be friendly to people who were not friendly to him, but his also refusal to give up his core convictions. So those are two, I would say, impressions of the man and also lessons for life that I carry from that time.
How wonderful. As you began to then grow older, you became a teenager and you were then beginning to find your own self. When was it first revealed to you that what was your work in our world? What is it, something that you would like to make your calling?
Thank you for this. Is a very interesting question. So I must tell you of an experience that occurred when I was 16. My father was the editor of the Hindustan Times. I had already joined college. And my father was at home at the time, and a young journalist on the Hindustan Times came up with a piece of paper to show my father. I opened the door, I looked at the sheet of paper just off the teleprinter, and it said on that piece of paper, Liaquat Ali Khan, Prime Minister of Pakistan, has been shot at. MTF. Now, I knew that MTF meant more to follow. Liaquat Ali Khan, Prime Minister of Pakistan, has been shot at MTF. So I said to the young journalist who had brought this sheet of paper, before I took him to meet my father, I said, I hope what follows is the news that Liaquat Ali Khan is dead. So I thought I had made a witty remark, and I expected this man to give a smile, but he frowned at me. And I was, at that time, of course, was put out by his reaction. But the memory of that reaction and the memory of the stupid remark that I made was an important part of my growing up. And I saw that I I didn't immediately understand it all, but I understood before too long that part of my remark was the popular prejudice. India and Pakistan are supposed to be enemies. And I shared the popular prejudice, but also I was a boy trying to be a man, and I wanted to show a macho side in me. So I understood. And of course, that realization of my absolutely stupid remark was a factor in my wanting to really understand the history of India, Pakistan, the Hindu-Muslim story, so that it made me a kind of a historian, as well as somebody who yearned for some kind of reconciliation.
How nice. And Rajmohanji, I have grown up with stories about how, my parents were in Lahore, my father was in the army, and how my father was protected by his Muslim friends for 6 months incognito. They looked after him.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And my nani on the other side in Firozpur, in our own home, a large home, she hid about 60 Muslims in her house, and she personally, sort of protected them along with my Nanaji. So we grew up with these stories about how on both sides of the border and in our own families, there was this wonderful affection and love. So that's why I'm very troubled by, people who try to make it out that we are enemies forever and things like that. So this is perhaps as good a time as any, Rajmohanji, for us to talk about, because this, when people create a memory, we are not able to create a new future. Could you talk a bit more about how we and Pakistan could potentially even today transcend these barriers and make a new beginning? What is your own sort of
this is a tremendous vision. I love your vision. And in fact, Anil, if only I had known these details about your story, both Firozpur story and Lahore story, I would have written about your family on both sides. Truly. I mean, I don't know whether you have managed to write it all properly, but my wife and I made a visit to Pakistan, Lahore mainly in 2005. And among other things, we collected stories like this of Hindus and Sikhs who had protected Muslims, and of Muslims who had protected Hindus and Sikhs in the 47 time. And you may or may not know, but in 2012-13, I wrote a book called Punjab, A History from Aurangzeb to Mountbatten. From 1707, when Aurangzeb died, and 47, when partition took place. It's a story of 240 years of Punjab, the greater Punjab, undivided Punjab, which most people do not know today. Today, we think of Punjab is our Punjab province, but then Pakistan is a much, much bigger Punjab with a much larger population. And they speak Punjabi there. And yes, the majority of them are Muslims, the vast majority of them are Muslims. But there are some Sikhs and there are still some Hindus, even in Punjab. There are many more Hindus in Sindh, but even in Punjab, there are some. And so in that book, a whole chapter is about people who helped the other side. Yes, there was terrible carnage, and we know about that. And every family that we speak to, they all say कि हम जानते हैं कि लोगों ने बचाया, but उनकी कहानियां हमने इकट्ठा नहीं की. So this is a tremendous point that you have made. If more of us can collect these stories and share these stories, yes, we need to know also the ugly truth, the bitter truth, what happened. Human beings do horrible things. And human beings in India too have done horrible things. And in Pakistan, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, we've all done it. But the positive side, the caring side, the courageous side is also a real part of our history. And God willing, it will be a real part of the future story of India and Pakistan. So I am delighted by your thoughts.
And I also made 2 visits to Pakistan, and I actually went and visited the home where my grandfather used to pray in the local Gurdwara, and he was the headmaster of a school. I went and tracked all that, and it was one of those wonderful things to meet some people associated at that time. I want to ask a particular question. All over the world, Rajmohanji, we notice that there is a lack of that quality to have dialogue across differences. And, more and more people all over the world are taking very often extreme views and not having that statesman-like quality to sit together and dialogue across differences. And I'm sure you have witnessed a lot of this in your life, and I'm very interested in knowing how your life you have had these experiences where you have attempted to bring people together. Because I remember even in '97 when I spent that wonderful time with you in Panchgani, the whole theme of India's 50 years of celebrations of India's independence was about reconciliation and forgiveness. So will you share more about this and what your life's journey has been in this attempt to try to get people together?
Before I answer a question, Anil, I would want you, if you have not already done it, please write the story of your family in Lahore and Firozpur. I think it is an absolute, and write it in as much detail as you can. It is a wonderful story and it should not be allowed to be forgotten.
Sure.
Now, yes, I've had many amazing opportunities to witness reconciliation. I was thinking just now before I want to try and see, what might interest you and your associates. There was a lady I knew who no longer living, a white woman who lived in Africa. She was herself born in Kenya, then she married a white South African, a wonderful couple. So this lady, Agnes Hofmeyr, as she became, her father was a white man, very friendly to the Africans in Kenya. But her father was buried alive by African militants who were angry with white rule. But Agnes Hofmeyr absolutely forgave these people. And even the people who were involved in the actual ritual burial alive of her father. So she and her husband and others in that family became good friends of mine. And they were amazing black South African leaders, a man called Philip Wundla, another man called William Nkomo, another man called Manasseh Morane, absolutely fighting for justice and equality, but with no trace of anger or hatred against the whites. So I've seen, this is just one example, and I've seen similar examples in India, elsewhere in the world, of people accepting their wounds and their hurts, but refusing to nurse bitterness and anger. So mercifully, I've had this chance to see this in many parts of the world. Now, I wish there was a magical way of multiplying these examples of reconciliation and forgiveness. I don't know if that there is any magical way, but I think there is a way in which all of us can make the attempt. And sometimes the attempt will be successful, sometimes the attempt will not be successful.
I want to also connect it to the current context. You teach at the University of Illinois, you live in North America. These are very unique times for the United States. And there is also this Black Lives Matter movement that is taking place.
Yeah.
And there is a legacy of Martin Luther King and how he was inspired. You also, and Gandhi ji and the whole people talking about that. And you mentioned just before this webinar started about this friend you have in California, the 92-year-old gentleman who studied Gandhi and how he is one of the Afro-Americans who has done some very unique work. Could you share something about how these Black Lives Movement matter? What would Gandhi have said in the current times to people there? And if you can talk also about your friend in California, it would be so nice for us to learn about that.
Yes, this friend of mine is called Reverend James Lawson, Lawson. He's 92. He was in India in the early 1950s, shortly after Gandhiji was assassinated. But he made a very close study of Gandhi's life. And while he was there, news started to come also of the civil rights movement in the United States. And he became absolutely wild with excitement. And he felt that the nonviolent technique is exactly what the African Americans of the United States needed. And he came back to the US. He became a very close colleague of Martin Luther King. And many people know that there were these very remarkable movements, starting with lunch counters, so ending segregation in lunch counters in cities of the South. Reverend James Lawson played the most significant part in training people who became very famous later in civil rights and nonviolent action. And so he is now 92. Many have heard, even in India, they would have heard of this extraordinary man called John Lewis, who was a congressman in the United States and is member of the House of Congress. And he had been beaten up during those brutal protests in the 60s. He was one of Reverend Lawson's students. Lawson was a mentor to this very famous man, John Lewis, who died recently. So when the funeral took place, the most powerful oration was from James Lawson. And of course, he spoke about Gandhi, he spoke about Ahimsa, he spoke about nonviolent direct action, and he spoke about Black Lives Matter also. So there is this very great possibility of increased collaboration between Indians and also Indian Americans and African Americans. But we have to also recognize, Anil, as you know, and I'm sure others also know, that by and large, the Indian Americans in the United States have not really acted out solidarity with the African Americans. They have lived their lives either among themselves with the Indian community or with the white community, but the actual interaction with African Americans is very, very minimal. There are exceptions. I mean, there is this remarkable lady now who's running for vice president. In India, we call her Kamala Harris, but here she is known as Kamala Harris. So she's a sign of what can be done by Indian Americans and African Americans and Latin Americans, and so many others, white Americans who make up this amazing country.
You know, one of the most important aspects that we are trying to understand with the help of, our students are trying to understand is that this whole evolution of consciousness in people, where they become more aware on observing what is happening in our world so that they could be part of the solution rather than simply becoming onlookers. So in this current state of the world, including the COVID crisis that is happening, Rajmohanji, what are you sourcing as insights on the state of our planet? And what would you encourage the young people on this webinar to take responsibility for so that they could be part of finding a solution?
Well, you were asking a very, very, very important question, and not an easy question, because I must be frank, Anilji. In addition to COVID, which of course is a fantastic development, it could have united everybody, but it hasn't. I mean, COVID was attacking everybody, irrespective of class, caste, race, religion, whatever. So it could have been seen as a tremendous reminder of the essential commonness of all of humanity, but by and large, the world hasn't yet accepted that. But in addition to COVID, what has happened in recent years, a negative one, is this ethno-nationalism. There was always nationalism, and there was some conflict always between nationalism and common humanity. But ethno-nationalism takes it one step further. What it says is that some people have a greater claim to a nation than other people. In America, whites must take America back. In India, Hindus must take India back. And this is a very deep thing in the world. In Hungary, in Poland, country after country, Turkey. So this kind of ethno-nationalism is also a reality that we must all fully appreciate. So I think one key to correcting what is wrong in the world is also to see what is happening in the world with very clear eyes. And since I'm talking with some wonderful people with you, I want them to recognize that what is happening around us, even in India, is very, very serious at this moment. And if we don't understand it, if we don't provide an alternative to it, if we don't stand up to it, then we may see some very difficult days. So, you ask a very important question about the planet, and yes, the environment. Many people in the world are becoming conscious that we all live in on this planet, that we are all together. But there is an understandable trend in human history, which has made this ethno-nationalism a big thing all over the world today. I wish I knew a roadmap to get out of this. I don't. But I think you and your team and others will have to apply themselves to this question. There is a great commonness in the world, but there is also this great desire to restore some kind of hierarchy, some people who are entitled to rule a country, and others who must be kind of lower down in the hierarchy. So उससे भी हमें संघर्ष करना होगा.
Rajmohan ji, one of the things that we in our institute, in the School of Inspired Leadership and in our higher education program we offer, is that we encourage students to say that, like Gandhiji said to each one of us, change begins with one person at a time. So we try to create a space in which students explore their own dilemmas and their own choices that they make. And one day in a week, our students work with a not-for-profit organization so that this is part of what is called the Social Innovation Program, so that they attempt to answer the question that in a democratic society like India, our job is not just to elect our representatives. It doesn't end there, but actually it begins after we elect somebody. In other words, how do we work active citizens? And therefore, here is an opportunity to work for a cause one day in a week in what we call our social innovation program. So we are attempting to do this, and many students enjoy doing this and they love it, and some of them make it a lifelong habit. But then there is also this dilemma that strikes the young people to say, you are teaching us these things which are so idealistic. But the real world, does it actually value this? Whether it's the organization which we will join, or it is the the political scene, and it is the double speak we feel between the people who are so-called our representatives. So very often the young people begin to get cynical or disillusioned, and one has to encourage them to say, you know what, we have no right to become skeptical and disillusioned, because if that way, we will not be able to channel our own energy. So what is your message to people who are attempting to be on this right path, but see a lot of discouragement in the examples of others?
So I would say that those who encounter discouragement, and they will do so all the time, that if they really mean business, they would welcome the discouragement, because it will make them stronger. Everybody these days, in the last few years, this Gandhi 150 and all that, the Vaishnava Janato song has been sung in dozens of languages worldwide. And this wonderful idea that a good person is somebody who understands the other person's pain. The peed parai. Paraya also means really the stranger, the outsider, jo bahar ka hai, apna nahi, auron ka hai. It's a wonderful thought to understand the other person's pain. But I also think that Gandhi's other idea, which is from Tagore's poem, Ekla chalo re. Ekla chalo re. I think Ekla chalo re today is as for anybody who wants now to tackle the situation in any part of the world, in the so-called real world, where yes, self-seeking and self-promotion, one's own publicity is the norm. So in such a situation, in addition to Peed Parai Jane Re, Ekla Chalo Re has to be the motto. And every discouragement, every setback, every hostility, act of hostility, we will welcome. It will spur us on further. I think that can be and will be the deep conviction of many of those who are working with you.
Oh, wonderful. Rajmohan ji, one last question from my side before Mayank begins to ask questions on behalf of our audience. And that last question is, in your own life's journey, there may have been some significant challenges. And I also know that Usha ji has played a very important role in your life. And I'd like you to tell us as to how Usha ji, being a partner and a fellow traveler, has enabled you to take on the life challenges. And also, what are some of those life challenges and what have you learned from those?
Well, basically, Anil, I'm not, I don't have an inner nature that wants me to be a dedicated kind of revolutionary to change the world. That is not in nature who I am. I have several pulls towards laziness, inertia, forget what's happening in the world. But yes, I did make a decision at a young age that I will conquer these pulls, and I will follow as Lincoln would say, the better angels of our nature, or my conscience, the inner voice, or the voice of truth that tells me what I should do. I'll follow that voice, and by God's grace, I've lived up to that resolution with all my weaknesses. But it's absolutely true to say that my wife Usha, and like your family, her family also came from that side, from now in Pakistan, but they were from the Sindh area. And then they came to Delhi first, and then they were in Bangalore. But Usha is far more instinctively committed to justice and honesty and impartiality and fairness, I would say, than I am. And she fights for me. She wants me to be my best possible self. And so I am just a very, very fortunate person that I have this very brave lady who is my life partner. And this is God's gift to me. I'm just terribly grateful.
Thank you very much. Mayank, you may put on your video and unmute yourself. Now begin to ask questions on behalf of the audience. Yeah. And your own first question, if you have a question to ask.
Well, sir, I will probably set a slightly better example. I will keep my personal question to the last, and I will probably be a better moderator by bringing the questions of others first. Thank you, Anil sir, for this opportunity on behalf of every student and all the amazing things both you and the entire Institute of Soil and the team does for us. Rajmohan ji, thank you so much for your time. This is invaluable. And of course, all the attendees of today's session, for taking out time and being part of this. I would like to remind you that we probably have 30 minutes for this, and the number of questions have already gone in such a huge number. I will try my best to make justice to the most pertinent questions, which will benefit all of us. So I apologize in advance if your question is not covered. I will probably take the first question, which is both, I think, pertinent and relevant to this. Rajmohan ji, Sneha Yadav, one of our attendees, has asked a very interesting question, which is directly related to the work which you're doing as a historian. She wants to know, to make the past and present through a rich, complex direction or depiction of it, is that the role of a historian, or to function as a counterweight to simplify, to the simplification of politics, ideology, and popular culture? What's the true role of a historian? To tell the truth or to simplify?
That's a great question. I think, of course, the historian must tell the truth. But I think a historian is also entitled to point out certain aspects of the truth of the past, which are encouraging or which are helpful for today. So, yes, the historian must not hide the ugliness in the past, but the historian is absolutely entitled to isolate some instances from the past and present them with in all their glory, while reminding the reader that this is not the only thing that happened, but this also did happen. And therefore, these positive things can also happen again. I don't know whether this is a complete answer to this important question, but I think, as I understand, historians' first loyalty is to the truth. Absolutely, it should be. But the historian is also a citizen. He or she is also keen to improve things in the world. So if he or she finds things in history that help positive trends for justice and equality and liberty today, why not?
Wonderful, sir. Thank you so much. There's another question which I have from Chinu Patro, who's on behalf of the PGDM students at SOIL, wanted to understand, what do you think are some of the root reasons for having a different ideology of liberalism in two countries? So what's the reason why the West and the East seem to see liberalism in two different contexts?
ये तो जरा कठिन सवाल है. But I think people do, each society has grown in a particular way. So based on their development, they will also interpret whether it's liberalism, whether it's socialism, in different ways. So now socialism in the best sense of the word would also mean justice, equality, as far as possible, equal opportunity for people, and a fair division of wealth. But in America, the word socialism is a terrible, terrible word. But in India and in many other parts of the world, it's not. Similarly, liberalism. Liberalism, in its best sense, means true freedom to express your feelings for an individual, and in a society that the state also allows true freedom to be exercised. But in other parts of the world, liberalism can be used or misused to suggest that people should be free to do exactly what they please, even at any cost to society, to their neighbors, to their families, to their children. So in each context, words like liberalism and socialism may mean different things.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Now I have a very interesting question from Sanjeev Tripathi ji. So his question is that it's a fictional fantasy question, but something which all of us would have hoped that it's true. If Gandhiji were alive today, what would his mantra be to deal with the several challenges that we are facing today?
I think I've already answered that. I've said that today he would emphasize not just Vaishnava Jana Pir Parai Jane Re, he would say, Ekla Chalo Re. Be absolutely loyal to what your conscience is telling you. In today's India, in today's world, to be fearlessly true to one's conscience is the most important need, whether for a young person, whether for a bureaucrat, whether for a judge, whether for a policeman, whether for a legislator. I think real obedience to one's genuine conviction. Of course, there are situations in the world where it would be crazy to go out and say exactly what you feel all the time. So you have to combine fearlessness with wisdom, with prudence, with ingenuity, with shrewdness at times. But deep down, there has to be this conviction that the conscience of human beings must have real expression.
Wonderful, sir. I think such amazing, pure words over there. Authenticity, empathy, fearlessness, courage. I think definitely the need of the hour. And for everyone listening out over there, since this is also something which soil has stood by as a pillar from so many years, some decades, in fact, I could mention that. If that's something which we look at, probably we wouldn't hope for if Gandhiji would be over here, we would have someone amongst us who would rise to be Gandhiji 2.0 probably, right? So thank you so much for that answer, sir.
Let me just add to this, because that's a great point you make. I think that we have to be very careful before we ask this question, what would Gandhi today do? When Gandhi faced whatever he faced in South Africa or in India, and incidentally, I would be the first to say that Gandhi was not a perfect human being. He was a human being. All human beings are imperfect. But he was an extraordinary human being. But he never said, he had some people that he was inspired by in the past, several people. But when he faced difficult situations, he did not say, what would Gokhale want me to do? What would Tolstoy want me to do? What would Srimad Rajchandra want me to do? What would Ruskin want me to do? He consulted his mind and his conscience. So I think today we should have the courage. Of course, we should learn from every fantastic person who's come in the past. But there are situations in the world today that Gandhi was not facing. Today, what's happening in the world. So yes, we will be inspired by Gandhi, by others also, but we must together have the courage to find our own solutions too. Sorry.
Wonderful, sir. I think that's what you're mentioning about that Swayam. Finding the answer in Swayam is probably more prudent and practical and going to be beneficial for us. I'm going to combine two questions asked by Mr. Ashutosh Sarangi and Kajal Chatija over here. This is a question very personal to you, sir. They would like you to share, if you could, a dear memory of you and Bapuji himself.
So, well, I think in a way I've already answered the question of how his affection, his hug, and his love, which was more expressed in gestures than in words. And I also spoke of how I learned from him about being both civil and also not yielding one's convictions. But yes, once I had a new pair of glasses, and I knew that he was very keen on frugality, simplicity, and that he would ask me questions about my new glasses. But I was also hoping that because he's meeting so many people every time, he would not notice that I'm wearing a new pair of glasses, so I would get away. But no, he saw, कुछ नए, तुम्हारे चेहरे पे कुछ नई चीज है. So I was prepared for it. आप तो जानते हैं कि मेरी आंखें कमजोर हैं. I needed a new pair of glasses. Okay. तुम्हें नए लेंस की जरूरत थी, नए फ्रेम की भी जरूरत थी क्या? So I don't say that this is the most memorable, but this is an instructive conversation from my grandfather.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you so much. Well, you before this conversation started on YouTube Live, sir, you also mentioned that you are open to answer all kinds of questions, and you're prepared, and you have already had an experience of people from different thoughts coming across. One of our questions over here, sir, is something which says that a lot of people. This is from Gopalji. A lot of historians and even people feel that if not for Gandhiji's presence, India would have had a different and maybe even a better future. What is your perspective to this, sir? I've read this quote unquote. So what would you probably share on this question, sir?
This is an interesting game people can play. Supposing there had been no Gandhi. We can carry it further. Supposing there had been no Nehru. Right. Supposing there had been no British. Supposing there had been no Mughal Empire. These are all very nice games to play. And one can, but looking at it in my assessment, actually, because of Gandhi, Gandhi simultaneously fought for freedom, fought for Hindu-Muslim equality, friendship, fought also for the caste. He didn't directly attack caste to begin with, but later on he did. But he certainly very strongly stood for absolute equality for the end of high and low. So गांधी ने जो हमारे देश के समाज में जो इक्वालिटी की चेतना रखी है, बराबरी की चेतना रखी है कि ये हिंदुस्तान सबका है, भारतवर्ष सबका है, and that India can be a democracy, and that the people can vote out their leaders. Yes, he said Jawaharlal Nehru is a remarkable man, Patel is a remarkable man, but he also said people can vote them out. So equality, liberty, fraternity, democracy, these foundations of this were laid by this man. He was not a perfect man, but he was an extraordinary man. And you have had nothing to do with Gandhi. As somebody looking at the past, if Gandhi had not been around, India would have had possibly, I can't prove it, would have had been broken up in several parts. And the man who, no one opposed partition as strongly as Gandhi did. He failed in that, but had he not been there, in my assessment, India would have been broken into several parts.
Brilliant, sir. I would like to point out to all our attendees that this is such a powerful and a difficult answer to give, because sir ended by mentioning that he opposed partition, but he failed. to speak of that to someone who's so revered and from your own family takes a lot of courage, but it also shows the level of integrity Rajmohan ji has and lives by with that. So thank you so much, sir, for that answer. Yes, it's a fictional question and probably answered in a very good way. From an anonymous attendee, I do not have the name of this person, sir, but it's very interesting. I think a lot of us will relate to this. Being the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi ji, you would have always had some sort of a challenging situation, some parallels drawn from the lineage that you come from, much similar to what a common Indian has to endure while growing up. What can your experience, which you could share, help other students and other people who go through with such comparisons of their lineage and their family?
Yes, I think this is a very real and a very important question. Fortunately, मेरे स्कूल में, मेरे कॉलेज में लोगों ने ज़्यादा उस पर ध्यान भी नहीं दिया. So I was left alone. Nobody paid special attention to me. Like there, I was lucky. But it is true that people would expect a grandson or granddaughter of Gandhi to do certain things in a particular way. But again, luckily, through circumstances, I made a decision fairly early on in life that I would not worry too much about what people may think or what people may expect. That I would follow, as Apne Kana Swayam, so that I would follow the deep conviction of my own mind and spirit. And that, so therefore, and also I realized something else, that people are not always thinking about me. They are thinking about themselves. I may worry about what people are thinking about me, but they are too busy with their own preoccupations. They couldn't care less what I'm doing much of the time. So to worry about what people may expect from you, what others think of you is a waste of time, waste of energy. You search out your own real goals and pursue them.
Okay, Rajmohan ji and Mayank, I want to say that some of the people are raising their hands, and this is a webinar. So instead of raising your hand, you kindly type your questions or comments in the Q&A box or the chat box. And there's a question on YouTube that I'm just asking, and which is a very interesting question. What were the fears of Mahatma Gandhi ji in not supporting Sardar Patel's candidature as the Prime Minister of India instead of Nehru? This question is asked by many people, but I don't know if you have a view on answering this.
It's a very good question. It has been asked many times. I've answered it also in many places, including in many of my books. But here is the short answer. Sardar Patel was only 6 years younger than Gandhi. Jawaharlal Nehru was 20 years younger than Gandhi. One. Secondly, Sardar Patel's health also was not good. He died in 1950, 3 years after independence. So these were two of the major factors. Nehru was a much younger person. And so Patel was a very important member of Gandhi's generation. Nehru was the leader of a new generation. So Gandhi was thinking of the future, and he felt that between the two, Nehru was more likely to be effective. And he also knew that Patel would very cheerfully give his very best, although he was older, but as Deputy Prime Minister. Look at the amazing things he did. So the Nehru-Patel joint leadership of India for 3 years after independence was a wonderful story.
Thank you so much no one can deny a fact of age. No one can deny the fact of health. So perfectly answered, sir. Anil sir, can I ask a question which I have received on the chat box right now?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So this question is from Yogesh Andleji, who has been, I think, a supporter of soil from the very beginning, and a very interesting question again, slightly different direction. Recognizing a downtrodden class of people, the Harijan movement placed them at a very pious level of pride. How can we reinstate such pride and overcome fragmentation, which is happening at such a frenetic pace in our country right now?
Well, a very important and difficult question, because the relationship between the so-called upper caste, so-called lower caste, so-called Dalits is a very difficult one. Yes. We want equality, we want fraternity, we want friendship, we don't want bitterness and anger. So how to create this is not so easy, but first step is that many of us should get to know more closely people from other backgrounds and other castes. We discuss them, we have occasional interactions, but real effort to get to know the daily lives of those who belong to other groups, other castes, other communities is not done. As I've said frequently, it's one of the lines I frequently use. We have opinions about other groups, we don't have knowledge about other groups. So by listening to people, by reading about them, studying about them, we can acquire knowledge about other groups, and then we can create the kind of harmonious as well as equal society we want.
Correct, sir. Thank you so much for that as well. Well, another difficult question coming across your way, sir. I'm sure you will face it with the same rigor that you have so far. So the question is from Rajesh Sachdev. This question is that it is not a coincidence that
he is my older brother and linguistics professor and director of Central Institute of Indian Languages. So
wow, okay.
Hanji.
No, I think I understand where the the question is coming from in sense of it's very specific to what it's asking. It is not a coincidence that all divided communities on whom national boundaries were thrust have experienced unrest. And they also quote examples like Punjab, Sindh, Kashmir, Tamils, Nagas, Gorkhas. How does one build bridges with magnanimity? I think it's a very powerful question, sir.
Well, I would say that the very fact that this question is asked is the stepping stone towards the bridge that we want to build. And with the fact that we're asking this difficult question, if there is such a history of suspicion, of bitterness, of wanting revenge, one side is one version of history, the other side is another version of history, one side is one kind of maps, the other side has their own maps. So ये बहुत मुश्किल ही सवाल है. But I think determination, research, collaboration, and search for inspiration. Sometimes unexpected things happen. An unexpected broker may emerge. An unexpected person who knows both sides may emerge. We don't know. But this is I thank Sachdev for asking this very important question, because it tells me that his heart and mind are searching for ways to answer this tremendously relevant question.
Yeah. And he did a lot of work with the underground movement in Nagas to be part of the peace process, actually.
Oh, fantastic.
So, that's right. I want to give an example of Yoav, my dear friend from Israel, who for the last 25 years, every month holds a dialogue between 100 Palestinians and Israelis together. For the last 25 years. And when somebody said, why are you doing this? Because there is no progress. He said, the very journey to have dialogue is the progress. For 25 years, the man does it. Your fact, yes.
I salute him. I absolutely salute him.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Mayank, the next question.
Thank you so much, sir. So this is a question for you personally. You mentioned, sir, earlier that you were lucky enough that when you were in college, you were not bothered so much about questions about your lineage and everything. But this question is now: is there any pressure on you to maintain a world-class discipline and dignity as your heredity? And if yes, how do you manage that?
Well, I have two pressures. One is from my conscience, the other is from my wife. But I'm grateful for these pressures. I'm grateful for these pressures, because left to myself, God alone knows what I would do or I would not do. But and about the biggest pressure, Mayank, and whoever is asking the question, is that I am pained by the situation in the world today. I am pained by the rise of ethno-nationalism. We took liberty, equality, fraternity for granted, but now those are under threat in many parts of the world. So that reality, and yes, and in addition to to the curbs on these things, there is actual promotion of hatred, actual promotion of hatred between groups. But so those realities keep me on my toes. Yeah.
Wonderful. I've very rarely heard someone say that, how do you deal with pressure? And your first answer is, I am grateful for that pressure. How many of us would have imagined that that is also a way of looking at it, that we aren't always grateful for those things which makes us happy in life, but also those things which gives us progress in life. And the path to progress is always filled with obstacles, difficulties, inconvenient and unpleasant experiences. So wonderful, sir. Thank you so much. This question was from Prakash G. So thank you so much on that. We only have about 5 minutes left for our
and
conversation.
we'll require a couple of minutes to sort of summarize. So there's a question, Mayank, of Ashit Sinha, you might want to read. He's been consistently asking in Q&A box, so let me add that.
Yes, sir.
He wants to know, what are your comments on the future of secularism in India?
Well, I think the future of secularism, or even the present of state of secularism, is something that should disturb us. So we should be deeply concerned that the commitment we made, and we didn't have always practiced it, but for almost 70 years after independence, we really believed that India belonged to everybody. It belonged to the Hindus, to the Muslims, to the Christians, to the Jews, handful of them, to the Parsis, handful of them, to the atheists, to the Sikhs. It belonged to the Dalits, it belonged to the so-called upper castes, it belonged to everybody, South and North. But all that is under attack. So, so we must be deeply concerned. And I think the solution to that will not necessarily come only from the ballot box, but it will come in the individual choices that people make. As I've mentioned before, it is the individual policeman, the individual judge, the individual bureaucrat, the individual MLA, the individual television anchor, the individual journalist. He or she will have to display the courage to fight for the values. And eventually, of course, it will happen. But at the moment, we are definitely in a very troubling situation.
So Mayank, your one last question, and Rajan Makhijani, my dear friend and colleague, who also is a very active volunteer for the Aam Aadmi Party, he asks that what was your experience of standing for elections and being in active politics? How was that experience like?
Well, it was an instructive. I learned a lot from it, and of course, you know that often, not always, but much of the time, an election outcome is determined by the wave, if some kind of wave exists. And I was unsuccessful. All the Aam Aadmi Party candidates in 2014 defeated, but we did get a good number of votes. 2/3 of the votes of the successful candidate we got. I was very heartened by the number of people, of course. The reality of life in East Delhi, where I stood from, the poverty, the need for radical change was so obvious. So I was sad, disappointed that I couldn't succeed, but I understood that it was beyond the capacity of individuals or even an army of supporters to defeat a wave. But I think, so I hope very much that my Aam Aadmi Party, I'm not an active member of the Aam Aadmi Party. I don't even know whether I'm a member or not, but I certainly want the Aam Aadmi Party and all parties to fight for the neighbor, for everybody, for the best values. So anyway, I was very grateful for the experience and for all the support that I received.
Thank you. Mayank, one last comment from your side, and then I will summarize what I learned today. But Mayank, for you to feel about your experience, what would you like to say?
Raja, sir, thank you so much. I always believe, sir, that the message and the messenger should be the same. You truly, sir, live by the words that you're speaking. You are a living example. And I think the Institute of Soil has pretty much taught that one thing to me, and I believe to countless number of other students that live by the values. Let's have our own house cleaned up before we try to pick up a broom and clean someone else's. And I think sometimes that's the best example which works. So thank you so much, sir, for reinforcing and reiterating to us the importance of making small but very specific changes in our lives. And sometimes that's enough to kind of drive an entire revolution in people's lives ahead. So that's my only thing, sir. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Anil sir and Rajmohan ji, for your thoughts. And all the attendees, I apologize if I was not able to take your question, but I tried my best to genuinely do justice to it. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Rajmohan ji, here are the things today I experienced in your presence. One, when you described Gandhi ji giving you that pat on your back and that affection, it was almost I could feel as if Gandhi ji is giving a pat. And when he talked to you about lovingly, he noticed that you have a new pair of glasses, but then he also asked, did you need to have a new frame? And what a lesson. And as you were growing up, that wonderful conversation that you had with yourself after you asked that so-called cheeky question to the journalist who came with the news about Liaquat Khan. And for you to turn that around, that introspection into answering the question about what is the purpose of your life and why would you not like to understand what is history calling us to reflect on. And I think you made this your lifelong journey into understanding what can we learn from the past so that we can create a better future. The humility with which you not only acknowledge everyone else, including your very kind invitation to me to write about our, my parents' experiences, and I will definitely now write about that with the help of my sibling. I'll definitely do that.
Thank you. Thank you.
The affection with which you also talked about the role that, has been played by important people in your life, and especially Usha ji, how she has been an absolute pillar of support and has made you a better version of yourself. Right through today in the tapestry that you created for us, I experienced complete honesty, brutal honesty of understanding where we are failing us. And yet you are resolved to say there is no shortcut. We have to keep each person, one person at a time, keep doing the right thing and never giving up, because that's not an option. So thank you, Rajmohan ji. Thank you very much for this absolute joy. I feel 1997 in Panchkani, when you invited me to be part of a conference and to facilitate some of the sessions to celebrate 50 years of India, that evening, almost 10,000 villagers walked with us with mashals. And I walked with you and I was just walking behind you. And I said to myself, I was not born when Gandhiji already left this world in the physical form. But today my life has been worth it because I feel very special in your presence. And therefore, I just want you to know, sir, that people who make people feel special about themselves in their presence are truly blessed. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much for investing this 1 hour with us today. And we are deeply grateful for that. Thank you very much. And thank you, attendees, for spending the evening with us. All the best.